Missing Time, the Robert Matthews legend. It's 8:45 p.m. October 1st, 1966. As the waves of the ocean gently roll onto the beach, the sun begins to set and Cape Cod becomes a place where stranger things begin to transpire. The stars hung over Cape Cod Bay with a rather wicked and devilish glow. Amongst the stars, off in the distance, crept three lights that seemed to dance for just a moment in the night sky. As an old bus below approached, there lies off in the distance a phone booth lit up by flickering, haunting lights. It was time to stop for the night. Robert Matthews felt a cool breeze blow through his hair as he stepped off the bus with no time to spare. Robert couldn't help but think of the war in Vietnam that raged on and on. For his lot in life was his loyalty and honor fighting for the U.S. military. He was reporting for his military service. There was an Air Force base just a few miles away he was to report to. It was getting late and street lamps gave off a dull glow in the darkness of the night. As he stood there staring into the darkness, he felt a chill run down his spine, as if something he could not see was staring back at him from the abyss. He was told by his commander to use the payphone to call for a ride to the Air Force base. He told the driver who was to pick him up he was in front of a small store called Dutra's Market. The person from the Air Force base said there should be a military truck that would swing by and pick him up within a few minutes. Robert was happy to hear this, as the area was deserted and gave him an eerie feeling. As Robert stood there waiting, his eye was drawn upwards to the heavens, where he saw several bright lights in the night sky. Unlike the other stars, these lights had color and seemed to move around rather strangely. This sent a chill up Robert's spine. He was overcome with fear, and he began to panic. Just what were these lights? During this dark and unknown moment, Robert ran back to the phone and called the base, telling them there were strange lights hovering over him in the night sky. However, to Robert's shock, the man on the other end of the phone began lecturing him and saying,
"I already sent a truck out to get you an hour ago, and you weren't there."
The driver even complained he was nowhere in sight and drove around the block looking for him anxiously. Robert thought only 2 or 3 minutes had passed, but in fact, it was more than an hour of time that Robert was unaccounted for. Robert was brought back to the Air Force base. He was brought into a room where several men began interrogating him, demanding he explain where he was during the missing time, as this was not acceptable in the military, as one must always be on time. Robert insisted over and over he was there the entire time. He even explained the strange lights he saw in the night sky. To his military investigators, it appeared as though Robert was suffering from some strange form of amnesia, a sense or loss of time. The interrogators also asked him if he had been drinking or had used any other substance like drugs, to which he firmly replied, "No, I'm sober." The question on everyone's mind was, how did Robert vanish, then suddenly reappear an hour later? Was this just a case of temporary mental illness? Or he fell asleep behind the building? Such things we may never know. However, there exists another alternative possibility. The possibility that the lights in the night sky he saw were in fact some form of UFO or extraterrestrial that had perhaps abducted him, then returned him an hour later. This rather bizarre phenomenon would not be the first or the last, as over the years, many more reports of missing time would be claimed by people who believed they were abducted by UFOs. Robert had also began recalling memories of being a child when he claims he was visited by something dark and malevolent in his bedroom. He thought it was some type of a ghost, but after reading books relating to his own experience and connecting the dots, Robert then claimed it was likely this childhood memory and the recent missing time event case were not ghosts that had been haunting him in the dark hours of the night, but in fact, aliens from another planet. Robert agreed to go under hypnosis to further investigate the situation. During his hypnosis, he began remembering the timeline of events that night. He claims the UFO lights came upon him in the blink of an eye, or less than a second, when he first noticed them. After the lights came down near the street where he could clearly see the UFO, he claimed 4 small aliens came down on a ramp, and just moments later, he would be laid out flat in the UFO in what appeared to be an operating room. This is where he claims he was examined by the creatures, then released. This was the stuff nightmares are made of. Even more terrifying, Robert claims they had giant black almond-shaped eyes that had a dull, evil, dead stare. The type of eyes you cannot unsee. Nevertheless, people like Robert Matthews, who claim they have experienced missing time and strange visitors from another planet, have many, many critics. Often the critics claim these are nothing more than forgotten memories from old sci-fi retro movies that weaved themselves into some other horrendous real-life experience, creating a new, horrendous memory that didn't really exist. Whether or not this is real is hard to say, but regardless, we must ask questions. Where in fact did Robert Matthews vanish to that night? He vanished for over an hour. It appears as though he didn't know the town or area, yet found a way to vanish, yet then decided to reappear just an hour later. According to a few experts, they have been quoted as saying there's nowhere to run off to. You are basically trapped on a small island-like peninsula near Cape Cod Bay. If Robert was having second thoughts about military service, why wait on a dark night in a strange place to run off? Does that make any sense whatsoever? Perhaps it is nothing more than he fell asleep under a tree where he could not be seen, or perhaps for just a moment in time, Robert Matthews took a detour into the unknown. Kenny Veach last seen driving down a dusty road, making one last trip, driving deeper and deeper into the unknown desert. But soon, his car would come to a grinding halt near an abandoned mine shaft. Despite being on government land, Kenny was on his way to go exploring and hiking, as he often did. One of the mysteries surrounding his disappearance is the infamous M cave that gave him chills that ran down his spine. And this is precisely when we begin to ask questions. Why, just why, did he press on with his exploration, likely being aware of how dangerous the Nevada desert is? For those of you unfamiliar with the area, it is riddled with legends and sci-fi-like mysteries. Somewhere between here and Area 51, there's secret testing, experiments that disfigure those involved, trying to merge man and beast, experiments of technology with weapons so powerful this one glimpse will give you nightmares for the rest of your life. And yet this one man continued on his mission, a mission to somewhere, by walking into nowhere, or so it seems. He had come to the end of his line. He had lost everything. He was slightly broke, somewhat penniless, and out of ideas allegedly. And yet he decided to take one last hike through the wilderness. This wilderness is a dry and dusty place we call the desert. An unforgiving dark place that spares no one, home to nothing but rattlesnakes, coyotes, owls, and other small creatures that stalk the tumbleweeds that blow by on a hot summer day. But the man in question, Kenny Veach, was not alone in the desert, for there are many, many others, many other poor souls that were swallowed by the sand dunes and what lies beneath them. What does lie beneath the sand dunes? The mountains, what lies behind the caves, the M cave that seem to invite these lonely hikers inside? Is there something dark and murky behind those walls of rock? Could it be a pack of coyotes, or a desert dweller that stalks the hills and cliffs? Or a secret government experiment Or a desert dweller that stalks the hills and cliffs, then lures in hikers with faint cries for help. Because this desert dweller is in fact a monster that prefers cannibalism, perhaps the simple outcome of radiation, nuclear testing, or something else going on at Area 51. Or perhaps a freak that escaped a government laboratory somewhere, half human and half alien. Over the last century, many visitors, hunters, hikers, have come back with stories from the desert, saying things like, the hills have eyes, or whatever is out there ain't no human. One group of young men who claimed to have heard voices emanating from one of these caves that was hidden somewhere inside a canyon. They said they could hear someone yelling for help. They walked for what seemed like a mile when they finally reached the voice. But upon reaching the mouth of the cave, the voice changed from something that sounded like a young girl in need of help, to an evil, demonic voice, almost a growl. Upon hearing this, and what seemed like a strange but alien growl, the group of men began sprinting back a mile to their truck and vowed to never return. When we hear these stories, we feel conflicted. Is there something in fact out there? Perhaps we are unaware of it, and what exactly it is. Or do people just get confused in the hot, dry desert weather, often getting up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit? How exactly does someone vanish in the middle of nowhere, when it seems there are few places to hide, and almost impossible to cover your tracks in the sand? No one is quite sure. Few people look surprised when they hear the news of a friend vanishing in a cathedral of tall trees that blanket the landscape of the northern forests in Montana. But the desert? Nothing but sand and mountains and tumbleweeds. It is without question hikers and hunters do fall into crevasses when crisscrossing through the rugged desert mountains. But people falling into dark pits and abysses that hide within the bone-dry mountain landscape could not explain every disappearance. Likely not. In many cases, their footprints seem to just stop in the sand, as if they were sucked into the desert by a giant creature we have yet to discover. Or could it be an alien abduction? Or perhaps the desert version of Bigfoot, the desert hairy beast. Anything is possible. But what is not possible is people vanishing into thin air as we would be led to believe. Considering the massive and ever-mounting stack of disappearances and cases, we will first look at the facts regarding Kenny Veach. For example, Kenny Veach was down on his luck. He had financial troubles. There were rumors of self-harm, etc. But Kenny was an intelligent, loving, and loved man. He had friends and family who would have helped him were he in need. Kenny drove out to his usual spot in the desert and then vanished into the sand dunes. His usual first stop was an abandoned mine shaft. On top of the mine shaft, investigators discovered his phone without a mark on it, as if someone had left it there on purpose. That is the only clue. Was it placed there on purpose? We must ask. Was it staged to look as if he fell down the mine? Yet no one found him down there. Why do so many people seem to vanish near abandoned areas? Perhaps nothing more than obvious danger that lurks within the ruins and old, broken, rotten, dry wood that barely holds up the structures. Perhaps that is it. Is Kenny Veach somewhere at the bottom of that mine shaft? And he simply left his phone sitting there. According to investigators, there was no specific evidence of that. Perhaps he disappeared and started his life over. Kenny Veach was traversing land owned by the U.S. military, bordering on the edge of Area 51. He was also armed, which may have caused alarm to Area 51's security guards if they saw him. Perhaps he accidentally walked too far into Area 51 territory. Perhaps that is the simple answer. Kenny Veach's story shall remain a mystery until more evidence can be found, or someone speaks up that knows more. But we mustn't forget how many crazy things have gone on in the desert, like the UFO sighting that had been reported in the Yucca Valley, 1953, after a large nuclear test and explosion, a large silver disc was reportedly seen crashing to Earth. Is there any connection there? Trevor Bazille. Back in 2020, an avid rock hunter named Trevor Bazille left his house in Panica, Nevada on August 14th. Trevor loved searching for interesting and new rocks. A rock hound he was. It was, by all accounts, his passion and life. He was also quite experienced and had many trips in search of rare stones and gems. Trevor allegedly ventured out into the Nevada desert, but never returned. When authorities were notified that he had disappeared, a search began right away. A search that yielded but one clue. Trevor's rock bucket was found. Over 100 volunteers went up and down Oak Wells Road just one day later searching for him. Dogs found his scent and began following it. It went 7 miles. It was then they discovered this rock bucket, along with a towel he was probably using. On the second day of the search, drones, ATVs were utilized, covering a massive grid of land. According to some who were involved, this was the largest search in Lincoln County. However, that same day, the scent trail was lost and seemed to begin branching out in strange ways that made no sense. The dogs could not find the scent any longer. Much of this was attributed to the heat playing tricks on the dog's ability to sniff out any more scent trails. By the third day, temperatures soared to roasting hot records, putting many search and rescue at risk of heat stroke. But bravely, they carried on, looking for Trevor until the search was called off due to excessive heat. According to the investigators, Trevor could have also become disoriented due to the heat or exhaustion from walking anywhere from 7 to 10, even possibly 14 miles. He could have fallen and become wounded and lost his way and perished from simple dehydration. Meanwhile, others suspect animal predation, perhaps wolves, mountain lions, or even a snake bite that could have rendered Trevor unable to walk at some point or made him delirious from the poison. There did not seem to be any foul play involved in Trevor's disappearance, although some are suspicious to claim he was too experienced and had made this exact trip so many times before. There must have been someone else involved. Only time will tell. Last but not least, the story and disappearance of Daniel Robinson, a young geologist, successful in life, aged only 24 years. On June 23rd of 2021, Daniel was last seen leaving his job at the intersection of Cactus Road and Sun Valley Parkway in Buckeye, Arizona. Daniel was acting a bit strange, allegedly a bit spaced out, staring off into space or staring at walls, according to the last person that spoke with him. Daniel had also mentioned to his co-worker that he was interested in heading over to Phoenix. After being reported missing, the police found Daniel's vehicle crashed and rolled over in the middle of nowhere. Jeff McGrath, a retired cop and private investigator, said the crash looked like a setup, as if it was done to make people think Daniel had a simple accident, then became lost in the desert after becoming disoriented from a head wound. Daniel was allegedly in love with an acquaintance he had met a few weeks before. Ultimately, the girl did not feel the same way, which has led many to believe that perhaps Daniel became depressed and wanted to escape for a while or take a trip out into the open desert to clear his mind for a day. But this cannot be confirmed. The rancher that actually discovered his vehicle had gone out looking for his cattle in the desert. It was around July 17th, not quite a month after he had vanished. According to the rancher, when he noticed a rolled over Jeep in a ravine, he had also mentioned what looked like red paint scrapes on the Jeep, possibly coming from a different vehicle, as if perhaps there was a collision before the Jeep rolled over into the ravine. If this is so, then where is the other vehicle? Why wasn't the crash reported? And exactly why would two vehicles crash into each other in the middle of nowhere? What would they have been doing out there, racing each other through the desert? It doesn't seem to add up. Or perhaps Daniel was escaping the scene of an accident. Or he was chased out into the desert where he was sideswiped and left for vultures and wolves that roam the landscape in the dark hours of the night. Considering his body has not yet been located, it all remains an unsolved mystery. Private investigator McGrath searched and investigated Daniel's home, specifically his bedroom. McGrath noticed Daniel's laptop had been tampered with after he vanished. His closet had also been ransacked. Was this the action of someone involved? Or a lone killer that stalks the streets at night, hiding from the police under the cover of darkness? Daniel's father, David Robinson, a military man, has put an extreme amount of effort into uncovering why his son vanished into thin air. David has personally reviewed all the evidence, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle back together, and has been quoted as saying he is unsure as to why anyone would have wanted to hurt the young, successful man. Perhaps it was jealousy. David's sister has been quoted as saying she thought over the last few weeks he did seem to just stare at the wall sometimes, or seem spaced out, that perhaps something was not right with him. Regardless of the current investigation, David, his father, refuses to ever quit searching for his son Daniel until he has an answer or someone else speaks up. God bless this family and all the other families that have lost people. Hopefully someday they have answers. Karlie Guse was only 16 years old when she vanished somewhere outside her home. Karlie was considered a bright and happy high school student. Her family reported her missing the morning of October 13th, 2018. Karlie was last seen by her family at their home in the White Mountain Estates near Bishop, California. But before the sun rose that day, Karlie would seemingly walk off the face of the earth and has yet to be seen again. During the early morning hours, Karlie had left her home while possibly wearing sweatpants or jeans and a white t-shirt and Vans brand shoes. Strangely enough, she had left her everyday belongings behind at the house, including her smartphone, something she was rarely seen without. At first glance, it would perhaps indicate she was intending to return home sooner than later. But sadly, Karlie still has never come home. She was last seen by a witness, Richard Eddy, walking south roughly 30 yards east of Highway 6 and 100 yards south of Sierra View Road. A rather deep search of the area following the investigation failed in finding Karlie or any trace she had possibly left behind. She has not contacted or called any of her family or friends since she vanished that morning. Consider for a moment, if you will, whether or not we have all the pieces to this puzzle, or perhaps some of those pieces have fallen onto the floor, making the puzzle impossible to put back together. And this is where the true mystery begins. Let us examine the first piece of evidence. Around 9 p.m. the night before, Karlie's stepmother said she had ran to her car after calling scared for a ride home. Karlie was said to be in a strange mental state, a state of disarray, of perhaps fragmented thought, the type of thoughts that open a very dark door in the human mind. Once we pass through this door, we enter into an unknown world. Within this realm, we find ourselves becoming terrified of mundane objects. Objects that may come to life if we stare at them long enough. We begin to think we are being watched, followed, as if someone is out to get us. This is roughly what Karlie's stepmother described in regards to her way of thinking at the time. She was crying, she was scared, and she wanted help. Her stepmother made an audio recording of this strange behavior. The behavior likely came from the night before, when Karlie had attended a party. It was then and there she may have experimented with marijuana. The marijuana could have been laced, according to her parents. However, we must also consider a rather overlooked simple fact. Marijuana can make a person very paranoid. Some medical journals state if an inexperienced person consumes marijuana, Their body may react by producing borderline hallucinations from paranoia. This may be due to a stronger strain of the drug. It may be because the person using already had a predisposition for schizophrenic behavior. Even a person with sleep deprivation may also have a heightened sense of extreme paranoia, the type of paranoia where the person begins locking the doors, closing the shades, or even arming themselves in fear they are about to be attacked. These experiences have sent many people into a deep state of psychosis. Was this what Karlie was experiencing? According to her stepmother, there seems to have been something off, something a little bit more than a typical night. Therefore, it is paramount to consider the drug may have indeed been laced, perhaps with PCP, maybe bath salts, or something unknown to the common person. This would explain all of the strange behavior and her vanishing. But does it explain why she decided to leave her house before the sun even had a chance to rise and illuminate her exodus to what she may have thought was a safer escape from her paranoia? It is unequivocally difficult to try and understand another person's state of mind when you don't even know them. Nevertheless, being that we are all human, we can often make assumptions that sometimes turn into facts upon finding evidence down the road. But it is just that alone that makes this case so exhausting. We are left to sift through the sand, looking for one tiny piece of evidence. A piece of evidence no one, including the police, can find. However, we must examine what does exist. The facts. And we must squeeze every last drip of those few facts to come to a conclusion in this late-night mystery. The simple fact Karlie had left her phone behind would strike any high school teenager as absolute insanity. The modern smartphone is not only a communication device, but a powerful tool. It is the phone and the phone alone that would have enabled Karlie to call a friend for a ride. It would have given her the ability to navigate GPS if she really wanted to run away and vanish, and a million other tasks that all come in handy when trying to start a new life on the road. But perhaps her phone became a burden, a tracking device that could have followed her. So it stands to reason she was aware of this and thusly left her phone behind on purpose. The second fact in this bizarre story is Karlie was exhausted. She was exhausted from being out partying. She had possibly been under the influence in a strange state of mind, perhaps severe paranoia, and yet randomly got up and left with nothing? But if this was in fact the case, then why would a paranoid young girl without any sleep sneak out of her house and then successfully vanish into thin air? Consider for a moment where Karlie lived and how that would have limited her ability to go missing in such a short period of time. White Mountain Estates is located in a remote area in the California desert mountains. Although leaving her phone behind may seem strange, we must also recognize there was a witness, Richard Eddy. Richard Eddy claims he was sitting in this hot tub around 6:30 or 7 a.m. He said it was rather cold outside, chilly, in the early morning hours, when he saw a young girl with long brown hair walking down the road, waving what appeared to be a small piece of white paper. She was wearing gray pants and a white top, as her stepmother had described. But why? If it was cold outside, then you most likely would not be fanning yourself. However, in some cases of drug use, it is plausible that the person may begin to feel hot due to raised blood sugar levels. Was this the case with Karlie? Did Karlie walk outside to cool off? Perhaps she began heading into higher elevation, where it would have been even colder. She was barely a mile from the highway, where she could have met someone for a ride. However, there appears to be no indication of this on her phone. Perhaps she brought the piece of paper to hitchhike out of there, flailing the paper around to catch a driver's attention. There seems to be something behind why she would be waving this strange piece of paper around, but perhaps not. On the other hand, do we actually know that Richard Eddy saw her and not someone else? No, we really don't. It was the stepmother who confirmed to Richard, not Richard. Richard said he saw a young lady, but could not be sure if it was her. Nevertheless, being such a small group of houses, and strange time to be out walking, along with the fact she was reported missing, there's a good chance he was indeed the last to see Karlie Guse. Now, after investigating the location of Karlie's house, I realized how easy it is to overlook the remoteness of the area. It is this remoteness that presents a danger. The danger may lie somewhere between her house and the edge of the mountains, less than a mile behind her house. For it is the hills, the valleys, and the mountains that coyotes stalk their prey. Although extremely rare, coyotes have been known to attack humans. However, there seems to be no reports of anyone else hearing someone screaming for help. That is not to say she was necessarily attacked or predated by coyote. It could simply be she wanted to get out of the house and get fresh air due to being stressed out from the night before. Whereupon she ventured into the mountains for a hike, less than a mile from her backyard. And it would have been there she would have been alone, vulnerable, and likely giving off the odors of food from within her home that had slowly bonded with her clothing. This odor is exactly what some coyotes can pick up on, and also may be the reason for them attacking. Or possibly, she could have simply tripped and fallen somewhere in those hills on the trail, and no one heard her scream, falling into shock or bleeding to death perhaps, and then maybe being attacked. All are possibilities. It is easy always to consider animal attacks as a probable cause for people who vanished near forests, mountains, and rivers. There was a full investigation. The investigation utilized a cadaver search dog to find her scent, or remains perhaps, but nothing at the time was found. A few years later, a former detective, Paul Dosty, and his associate forensic scientist utilized a quantum oscillator. According to the online article, they found traces of human blood, a coyote den, and then another trail of blood that led to a small canyon. Within this canyon, there was a pair of old underwear with bloodstains on them. They then found coyote feces that indicated human remains, and thusly, they posed the question, and I quote, "If it is not her remains, then who?" But often we hear of missing people and their stories, and we neglect to recognize just where they vanished. Because it is within those details, we form a much clearer picture of who the person was, and how their surroundings may have affected their disappearance. Many choose to believe Karlie got in a car with the wrong person and met a grim fate somewhere down the road. On the other hand, some choose to believe we live in a dangerous world where just taking a simple walk through the hills may result in injury that then leads to an animal attack. Meanwhile, somewhere in the darkest parts of our thoughts, some remain suspicious of friends, suspicious of family, believing perhaps we are not being told certain details about Karlie's sudden and rather untimely vanishing. But we will leave this case to the authorities, for it is up to them to decide who is guilty and who is not. We may not all have the same reaction when someone vanishes. We may also express our feelings differently, but that does not make someone guilty of a crime, for it is not a crime to be different. Somewhere down a dark, cold, and forgotten highway, a young girl named Karlie Guse wandered out of her house and vanished somewhere between here and into the unknown. This is one of those rare situations in which I actually knew the person who had vanished. I hadn't given it much thought in the last 20 years, for it seems like a lifetime ago, those few times I hung out with Nate, Nathan, Nathaniel, Fish, the many names he seems to have had or went by. I had ran into one of his friends recently, and had discussed his case and told him I was doing this YouTube channel. And he had filled me in on a little more info, which you are about to hear. But again, this is a very sad case. Anytime anyone young, male, female, whoever, vanishes, it is an utter tragedy. We never know when the last time will come, and the last time we may see an old friend. because that best friend is about to slip away into the fog. Fog you walk into, but do not walk out of. This is the tale of a fisherman, a young fisherman, who dreamt of fish so often his friends often called him Fish. The year 2004, the date September 28th, the place Morris, Minnesota, a northern town. A young man walks out to his car. He has a long drive ahead of him, 350 plus miles. More than 7 hours of twists and turns in the road before he reaches his destination. A destination unbeknownst to all others. This was the last time that the adventurous college student Nathaniel Williams would be seen and had departed for a rather unusually distant fishing trip in northern Minnesota near what is known as the Boundary Waters. The college campus that Nathan attended lies on the edge of this northern small town, the last place you would assume anything bad could happen. And in fact, it was not there in Morris that this rather unfortunate situation unfolded. According to one of his friends I interviewed, who would like to remain anonymous, a few weeks before Nathan and other friends were discussing what they had planned for the next few weeks, going to movies, studying, and a party here and there, and so on. According to his friend, Nathan was a very run-of-the-mill, normal type of guy. He enjoyed socializing, sports, lifting weights, hunting, and hiking in the woods, and going on fishing trips when he had a chance. Nathan went as a lone wolf on this long adventure, which was not unusual for him, and it is true indeed. He told several people, including this friend I interviewed, he was planning to make the trip. He had mentioned fishing and hunting did not get any better than up in the Boundary Waters and virgin wilderness. In fact, it appeared to this friend as though he almost went out of his way to let everyone know he would be taking this long trip. And rather strangely, he told many people he would be gone for a total of 2 weeks. And this is precisely where the story becomes a bit strange. If we fast forward to October 7th, 9 days after Nathan had left campus and last been seen, he was reported missing by his parents. His parents had allegedly called the college campus, claiming they had not heard from Nathan in several days, and he had allegedly missed class for over a week. Now the real mystery is this: if in fact Nathan was planning to leave for 2 weeks, had he made this clear to his professors? Allegedly not. He went out of his way to tell his friends he would be gone for 2 weeks. But had he not told his parents? He was going fishing and hunting in a remote area of thick woods and wilderness for 2 weeks. Apparently not. The timeline does not fully match up. He was only gone for 9 days when he was reported missing, allegedly by friends, and then his family to the local Morris police. Or perhaps there's a slight misunderstanding. Perhaps he said he would call a few times from the campground he was near, but did not, and this is what alarmed his parents or friends. Then again, I must ask, who goes camping out in the wilderness for over 2 weeks while attending college? A few days, sure, maybe even a week if you are ahead on your studies, but 2 weeks seems rather strange. This could cause you to, in fact, perhaps fail the entire semester. According to friends and family, Nathan by no means was down, depressed, or suicidal, and for the most part, suicide has been ruled out, for it is far easier to commit suicide anywhere versus driving over 350 miles into the deep wilderness to end your life by vanishing into the deep, dark woods. There are, however, a few clues that have been left behind, either in his truck or on his bank statement. There are credit card receipts. These prove the route he drove. He had been planning to go to Kawishawee Lake in the Boundary Waters. Of the 2 receipts from the gas station, the first receipt is from Brainerd, Minnesota, the first stop he would have made probably to get gas and snacks. A second receipt is from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, proving he was in fact on his way to Kawishawee Lake in the Boundary Waters. But Grand Rapids is still a few hours from the Boundary Waters. His old, restored 1960s pickup truck was discovered soon after. According to authorities leading the investigation, it was parked off to the side of the road, possibly even stuck. Perhaps he had parked it there because the parking lot next to the road was likely full that weekend, and it would not have stuck out with other vehicles parked in front and behind it as well. The pickup truck was very low on gas, but allegedly it could still drive a bit farther. Some investigators believe that he may have decided to stop there on the side of the road near Hog Creek, next to the canoeing car park, then perhaps either took his gas can and took a ride back to get gas, or could have even tried walking somewhere back to get gasoline. But the gas can theory doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Why would you get out of your truck carrying a gas can, a 12 gauge and 2 fishing poles, a tackle box, and whatever else you may have brought with you while walking down the road? Wouldn't that look a bit strange? Perhaps not in the Boundary Waters, indeed. But regardless, wouldn't you want to leave those things hidden somewhere in the vehicle? Yet they were not in the vehicle. Therefore, I think it is more likely he just went out and began his hike. Other theories speculate he may have been abducted or robbed while trying to secure a ride, although both seem rather unlikely. One other unexplored theory, according to this friend I interviewed, there exists a slightly more murky theory. A clandestine departure into a new life. Over the last few years, this friend had noticed Nathan taking out large portions of cash and splurging from his bank account. And that for a 20-year-old guy, he often seemed to have a very large bank account balance, often over $25,000. Or perhaps he was just well off. And they say he was quite generous, always offering to pay for food and drinks and so on. Nathan had once confided in him, saying, "I'm not sure what my parents do for a job. They claim to be scientists, yet don't seem to know much about science and sometimes write notes on the back of a piece of scientific paper as to convince me of their job, yet things never seem to match up. We always seem to be moving from one country to another before we finally landed somewhere near Maryland." And indeed, there is some truth to these theories, as Nathan and his parents lived in several foreign countries, and he spoke Spanish almost fluently. But what can we make of this strange tale? Is this, in fact, just another case of a young man who vanished in the woods chasing deer? Or lost his way going too far into the woods trying to find the perfect spot for fishing? Or did Nathan meet foul play on the highway, picking up a hitchhiker going up to the Kawishwi Lake in the Boundary Waters? Anything is possible. It is that forgotten shred of evidence that shines the light on these dark, cold cases once found. Yet once again, as in many other strange tales, there is no evidence to confirm anything except his final receipt from Grand Rapids. And in fact, the police had even tried using dogs to pick up his scent. But there is no scent trail to be found, as in many other cases, and his truck being discovered near Hog Creek, just a ways down from the large lake. There were no strange goodbye notes left in the vehicle, no signs of struggle, no forensic evidence like blood anywhere. His fishing gear and 12-gauge shotgun were missing, which indicates it is likely he got out to start his hike into the wilderness as he said he would do near Hog Creek, and at some point, perhaps, just perhaps, Nathaniel took a wrong turn, perhaps by an old oak tree, along a muddy river, and from there, Nathaniel Williams took a detour into the unknown.